Okay, so let's continue our discussion on the conservation and the in the chapter of flora and fauna. So let's look at the conservation of forest and wildlife in India. So conservation in the background of rapid decline in wildlife population and forestry has become essential. But why do we need to conserve our forests and wildlife? That's like a fundamental question. Conservation preserves the ecological diversity and our life support systems, which include water, air, and soil. It also preserves the genetic diversity of species, of plants and animals for better growth of species and their breeding. So, for example, in agriculture, we are still dependent on traditional crop varieties. Fisheries are too heavily dependent on the maintenance of aquatic biodiversity. In 1960s and 70s, conservationists demanded a national wildlife protection program. The Indian Wildlife Protection Act was implemented in 1972 with various provisions for protecting habitats. Now, an all India list of protected species was also published. The thrust of the program was towards protecting the remaining population of certain endangered species by banning hunting, giving legal protection to their habitats, and restricting the trade in wildlife. Subsequently, central and many state governments established national parks and wildlife sanctuaries about which you have already studied. The central government also announced several projects for protecting specific animals which were gravely threatened, including the tiger, the one-horned rhinoceros, the Kashmir stag or the hangul, the three types of crocodiles, freshwater crocodile, saltwater crocodile, and the gharial, the Asiatic lion, and others. Most recently, the Indian elephant, black buck, that is Chinkara, and the great Indian bustard, that is Godawan, and the snow leopard have been given full or partial legal protection against hunting and trade throughout India. So, very simple, this paragraph actually talks to you about how the Indian Wildlife Protection Act, which was implemented in 1972, with the provision to protect habitats led to some changes, right? First and foremost, the creation of a list of protected species. Okay. And the main thrust was that it had to protect the remaining population by banning hunting and giving legal protection. Then that there are national parks have been and wildlife sanctuaries have been established. Then the central government actually came up with specific projects for protecting specific animals, and here are all the examples. And more recently, there are some animals which have been given full or partial legal protection. Okay, so it does show that having a specific program geared towards the protection of our flora and fauna can definitely help. Now let's talk about Project Tiger. So tiger is one of the key wildlife species in the faunal web. In 1973, the authorities realized that the tiger population had dwindled to 1827 from an estimated 55,000 at the turn of the century. So it's just a few percent. The major threats to tiger population are numerous, such as poaching for trade, shrinking habitat, depletion of prey based species, growing human population, and so on. Also, the trade of tiger skins and their use of their bones in traditional medicines, especially in Asian countries, left the tiger population on the verge of extinction. Since India and Nepal provide habitat to about two-thirds of surviving tiger population in the world, these nations became the prime targets for poaching and illegal trading. So, Project Tiger was one of the well publicized wildlife campaigns in the world, and it was launched in 1973. Tiger conservation has been viewed not only as an effort to save an endangered species, but with equal importance as a means of preserving biotypes of sizable magnitude. The Corbett National Park in Uttarakhand, Sundarbans National Park in West Bengal, Bandhavgarh National Park in Madhya Pradesh, Sariska Wildlife Sanctuary in Rajasthan, Manas Tiger Reserve in Assam, and Periyar Tiger Reserve in Kerala are some of the tiger reserves in India. Now, these conservation projects are now focusing on biodiversity rather than one or few of its components. There is now a more intensive search for different conservation measures. Increasingly, even insects are beginning to find a place in conservation planning. So, this is a new theme, conservation planning. In the notification under Wildlife Act of 1980 and 1986, several hundred butterflies, moths, beetles, and one dragonfly have been added to the list of protected species. In 1991, for the first time, plants were also added to the list, starting with 6 species. It might be useful for you to collect more information on the wildlife sanctuaries and the national parks of India and their locations on the map of India. Now, let us look at the type and distribution of the forest and wildlife resources. So, even if we want to conserve our vast forest and wildlife resources, it is rather difficult to manage, control, and regulate them. In India, much of its forest and wildlife resources are either owned or managed by the government through the forest department or other government departments. Now, these are classified into simply two categories: the reserved forest and protected forest. So, reserve forest, which is more than half of the total forest land, is being declared as reserve forest. Reserve forests are regarded as the most valuable as far as the conservation of forest and wildlife resources are concerned. Then protected forest is almost one third of the total forest area is declared as protected forest as per the forest department, and this are protected from any further depletion. And then you of course have the unclassed forest. So these are other forest and wastelands belonging to both government and private individuals and communities. Now, reserved and protected forests are also referred to as permanent forest estates, maintained for the purpose of producing timber and other forest produce and for protective reasons. So, Madhya Pradesh has the largest area under permanent forests, considering 75% of its total forest area. Jammu and Kashmir, Andhra Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, and Maharashtra have large percentages of reserved forest of its total forest area, whereas Bihar, Haryana, Punjab, Himachal Pradesh, Odisha, and Rajasthan have a bulk of it under protected forests. All northeastern states and parts of Gujarat have a very high percentage of their forest as unclassed forests managed by the local communities. Now, what is the relation between community and conservation? So, conservation strategies are not new in our country. We often ignore that in India, forests are also home to some of the traditional communities. In some areas of India, local communities are struggling to conserve these habitats along with government officials, recognizing that only this will secure their own long term livelihood. In the Sariska Tiger Reserve, Rajasthan, villagers have fought against mining by citing the Wildlife Protection Act. In many areas, villagers themselves are protecting habitats and explicitly rejecting government involvement. The inhabitants of the 5 villages in the Alwar district of Rajasthan have declared 1200 hectares of forest as the Bhairodev Dakav Sanctuary, declaring their own set of rules and regulations which do not allow hunting and are protecting the wildlife against any outside encroachments. Now let us look at the snippet about sacred groves, which is a wealth of diverse and rare species. So nature worship is an age-old tribal belief based on the premise that all creations in the nature have to be protected. Such beliefs have preserved several virgin forests in the pristine form called sacred groves, the forests of god and goddesses. These patches of forests or parts of large forest have been left untouched by the local people, and any interference with them is banned. Certain societies revere means respect a particular tree which they have preserved from time immemorial. The Mundas and the Santhal of the Chota Nagpur region worship Mahua, which is Bessia latifolia, and Kadamba, that is Anthocephalus Kadamba trees, and the tribals of Odisha and Bihar worship the tamarind, the Tamarindus indica, and mango, Magnifera indica trees during weddings. To many of us, people and banyan trees are considered sacred. Indian society comprises several cultures, each with its own set of traditional methods of conserving nature and its creations. Sacred qualities are often ascribed to springs, mountain peaks, plants, and animals which are closely protected. You will find troops of Mackays and langurs around many temples. They are fed daily and treated as a part of a temple devotees. In around Bishnoi villages in Rajasthan, herds of black buck, chinkara, nilgai, and peacocks have been seen as an integral part of the community and nobody harms them. Now, it might be a good idea for you to write a short essay on any practices which you may have observed and practiced in your everyday lives that conserve and protect the environment around you. Now let us continue our discussion on the community and the conservation. So the famous Chipko movement in the Himalayas has not only successfully resisted deforestation in several areas, but has also shown that the community afforestation with indigenous species can be enormously successful. Attempts to revive the traditional conservation methods or developing new methods of ecological farming are now widespread. Farmers and citizen groups like the Beach Bachao Andolan in Tehri and Navdanya have shown that adequate levels of diversified crop production without use of synthetic chemicals are possible and economically viable. In India, Joint Forest Management or the JFM program furnishes a good example of involving local communities in the management and restoration of the degraded forest. The program has been in formal existence since 1988 when the state of Odisha passed the first resolution for the joint forest management. JFM depends on the formation of local village institutions that undertake protection activities mostly on degraded forest land managed by the Forest Department. In return, the members of these communities are entitled to intermediary benefits like non timber forest produces and share in the timber harvested by the successful protection. The clear lesson from the dynamics of both environmental destruction and reconstruction in India is that local communities everywhere have to be involved in some kind of natural resource management. But there is still a long way to go before local communities are at the center stage in decision making, except only those economic or development activities that are people centric, environment friendly, and economic rewarding. Now, here is a quote from Gautam Buddha: the tree is a peculiar organism of unlimited kindness and benevolence and makes no demand for its sustenance and extends generously the products of its life activity. It affords protection to all beings, offering shade even to the X Men who destroy it. And that brings us to the end of this chapter.